You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
We are talking to Daniel Harris today. He is the opinions editor of UChicago Gate, which is the University of Chicago's political review. He is an undergraduate in history. So Daniel, thanks for taking the time with us. I appreciate it.
Jacob, David, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're really glad to have you on. So Daniel, you are... like I said, you're in college right now. You are getting your undergraduate in history, and you are interested in the labor movement. And like I was telling you this morning, David is an old man, and he likes to see young folks involved in the labor movement and interested in unions and what they can do for working folks. So what was kind of the genesis of your interest in the labor movement? What was it that turned you on to unions and that kind of advocacy?
Well, as we were talking about before the show, it definitely is something that we have a family tradition of. My grandparents have had a long history of political activism committed to the cause of working people. My dad has spent much of his life in the labor movement and crafting labor policy and standing up for working people across the country. But I think that just growing up and developing my political values, I realized that workplace democracy and worker power are vital parts of any just society. So if we want to achieve our goals, whether that's prosperity, liberty, democracy, all of this requires putting more power in the hands of working people so that they can dictate the terms of our society.
Absolutely. We totally agree with that. And that's, I know that I'm younger as well, but it definitely heartens. I love to see folks that are closer to my age as well. A lot of times I'm at these union meetings and I'm the only person under like 40. So it's nice, it's nice seeing somebody my age interested in this kind of stuff. And so you came across our radar. You wrote an article for UChicago Gate titled "Right to Work Must Die," about right to work laws and the conservative agenda to destroy worker power across the country. And so just kind of lay the article out for us. Like what are you talking about there, and what's kind of your thesis in the article?
Yeah, so in the 1950s and 1960s, when the labor movement was really at its peak, the big business interests in this country and their conservative allies in all levels of government realized this is sort of a do or die moment for us. Either we allow workers to continue to build power, continue to organize industry and their workplaces, and we continue to lose our bottom line because working people will have better wages, better healthcare, better pensions. And so they decided this is when we crack down. And so they did their absolute best, and they did an excellent job. It pains me to say, but they did a great job cracking down on organized labor. And, it was in tandem with trade deals that took a lot of these jobs out of the United States, which decimated organized labor. But really, right to work laws are the front line of the legal battle against labor unions. And what a right to work law is, for anyone out there who doesn't know, is it prohibits a contractual agreement between the union and the employer requiring that all members pay dues. So what that means is that a member can demand that the union represent it legally against the employer for some sort of lawsuit, whatever the case may be. And then the union is obligated to spend tens of thousands of dollars representing these workers, even though this worker may not pay dues, as opposed to a collective bargaining state where when your workplace is organized, everyone pays dues and you all share in the benefits because you all contribute to the union. And what this has done is reduce the amount of funding going towards labor unions, because you have a free riding problem where working people say, if I don't have to pay the dues, but I can still get better wages, better healthcare, a pension, I'm not going to pay the dues. And then the union in a right to work state has very little money. And what happens is union density goes down, fewer workplaces are organized, and the union has little to no ability to influence political events in that state or in that county. And as a result, wages go down, the workplace becomes much less safe. I think that the best statistics on this show that for every 1% that union density goes down in any given industry, workplace fatalities go up 5%. So, we see that unions are really they're keeping workers safe, and right to work laws, by destroying the union, are destroying the lives of working people across this country.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on the show as far as the safety aspect coupled to the union density in each state and across the nation as well. And it really speaks to what can happen whenever workers have control or have some say in their working conditions. And like Jacob said, I was real interested in bringing you on for the simple fact that whenever I came across your article, I guess a couple of months, maybe a month, 6 weeks ago, when I was doing some research on another issue, and generally I don't read right to work, articles framed around right to work that much because it depresses me. But yours caught me off guard because you were mentioning the Ludlow massacre and things. Right. Of that nature that very, very, I mean, it's amazing how so few people know about the history of the labor movement. And so I automatically assumed you were my age or older. And I was like, well, I'll finish this article. And then I clicked on your title, your name up there. And I was like, holy smoke, this guy's like younger than my son. So, yeah. But I mean, that kind of speaks to you with your history degree. So why do you, in your opinion, I mean, Jacob is a little bit older than you, and I talk to him every once in a while about it, but in your opinion, why do you think, let me frame it this way, what are we doing wrong to not have more involvement with the younger generation, the millennials? Where are we going wrong? Because they're media driven, but apparently we're not doing something right to bring them in.
Well, I appreciate that question, and it's a tough one. And I'd say first and foremost is that it's certainly not primarily the fault of labor organizers and unionists that my generation is not educated properly on the history of organized labor. It's the fact that people in power don't want my generation to be educated on organized labor. I talk to my friends about this all the time, where we'll have a 2-hour conversation about worker power, about union models, and then we say, can you imagine if we had been taught this in high school? And because of course we weren't. I think about the AP US history course that I took my sophomore year of high school, and I think that over those 40-something weeks of school, the words labor union came up maybe once, and it was when we were learning about the Haymarket riot, and the only thing we were taught was, labor unions were these scary, socialist, radical, violent. And so I think that the conversation has to start with, what are we being taught and why? And what we're taught is that sort of all the change that's happened in America has happened because, the people at the top are good people and they want everyone to succeed. And the reality is, I talk about this in the beginning of the article, like you said, working people bled and died and fought tooth and nail for the most basic rights. I mean, my university was founded by John D. Rockefeller. Yeah. He pushed the U.S. National Guard to murder the mine workers at the Ludlow massacre. He convinced them to set the encampment on fire with women and children, and the mine workers had to arm themselves and fight back just to form a union. And that's the sort of thing that we need to be taught. I think at the level of what can unionists do, what can people in this movement do, honestly, I think that there's been a lot of progress made. I think that in my generation, there's a lot of sympathy for the labor movement, and people who are politically active, it's sort of taken as a given. The same way that people my generation say, yes, Medicare for all, we all deserve Medicare. People say, yes, labor union, everyone deserves a labor union, even if we don't think about it as much. And I think that the reason that labor unions are not sort of in our consciousness in these political discussions is because the labor movement in America just on a whole is comparatively weak. And so I think that if we want to make the labor movement a bigger part of the conversation, we got to make the labor movement bigger.
I definitely agree with that. And, it is unfortunate that kind of the thing that caught fire first was Medicare for all, free college, a Green New Deal, instead of making the labor movement stronger, because it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, right? Like, you're not going to get these big societal changes that are going to benefit the everyday working people without a mass movement of working people with the power to back up demands with force. And labor unions are they're the strongest tool in the toolbox that working people have to fight for change. And so, I don't know. I always felt that it was unfortunate that the policy changes caught fire before the means to get those policy changes.
Yeah.
Back to the article really quick. This is something that I kind of wanted to underscore because, like, right to work gets so little play. The thing that people immediately think is that right to work laws give workers more freedom and more individual freedom and stuff like that, and it reduces government overreach, because it's championed by the people that hate big government, right? It's championed by these people that value liberty ostensibly, but what it does is it is literally the government coming into a contract negotiation between two private entities, the employer and the workers, and saying what you can and cannot have in your contract. I mean, it's astounding just the bald-facedness of the hypocrisy, because it's literally the government saying what you can and can't agree to in a contract, where they would never do this in any. You want to sign away your right to sue your employer? That's fine. You want to sign away your right to protect your privacy? That's fine. That's no big deal. You want to sign away your right to not pay union dues? That's a problem. We don't want to do that. And so it's almost like they are not propelled by a genuine interest in protecting individual liberty. It's like they're propelled by an interest in destroying worker power. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
The Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have Daniel Harris. He is the opinions editor at UChicago Gate, which is the University of Chicago's undergraduate political review. We are talking about his article, Right to Work Must Die. And when we left off, I was talking about the hypocrisy of the fact that this policy is championed by people that are saying that this is to decrease government overreach, increase individual freedom, while literally doing the opposite of both of those things. And it is hypocritical in another way, because what this does is encourages free riding, like Daniel mentioned earlier. It encourages free riding by allowing freeloaders in union-represented shops to take advantage of union representation, of the higher wages, the better benefits, the legal team that unions bring to the table without paying dues. So, and the same people that are proponents of right to work also constantly rail against undocumented immigrants, ostensibly because they're freeloaders, right? They say that undocumented immigrants don't pay into the welfare system and they take so much welfare and whatever, even though undocumented immigrants pay taxes, support essential industries, et cetera, et cetera. It's doubly hypocritical. And Daniel, you mentioned both of those things in your article. Can you just talk a little bit about why you think that they're able to get away with just such blatant hypocrisy?
Absolutely. And it really is ridiculous. But the argument that they make that somehow you shouldn't be required to pay union dues when the union is going to represent you, when the union is going to deliver higher wages. What they're really saying is we want to do anything we possibly can to keep money from getting in the hands of the organizations that will stand up for working people. And there's nothing to it more than that. That's all that there is. It's just a hatred of worker power and working people. And the Supreme Court has already ruled that the union cannot take dues and use it for political purposes that the workers don't approve of. That's already illegal. And so the idea that paying dues is a violation of your freedom it's really absurd, especially when you consider the fact that in a workplace, if a majority of your workers vote to unionize with a union, you don't get to decide, you don't get to subvert the will of the majority. And so if they want that union, you all have to pay dues. And if you have such a problem with the union that you cannot, in good conscience, pay dues, you are free to go work for Jeff Bezos and work a minimum wage job without health care, without a pension. Meanwhile, all of your coworkers will be enjoying a safer workplace, a higher wage, and better benefits. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that it's about freedom of choice is really ridiculous, because your coworkers have already decided, and if you have a problem with that, you don't need to be in that workplace.
Right. And you mentioned that when we in a democracy, when we vote, I did not vote for Donald Trump. I don't get to just not pay taxes anymore because I didn't vote for because I didn't vote for the government that represents me. I don't get to just opt out. I don't get to just take my ball and go home. This is we live in a society. You can't just you can't just opt out of society, and you can't just opt out of paying taxes. And it's the same when you are benefiting from a union in your workplace. And like you mentioned in your article, the workers can have the choice of any of the hundreds of labor unions in the country to represent them. They are not bound to have any individual union represent them. And in fact, anytime they can disaffiliate and become an independent union or affiliate with some other union. And it's amazing. And like you said, unions have been prohibited from using dues on political actions for decades.
Yeah, that's long over.
The only thing that union dues are used for is direct representation.
Yeah, it's very strange to me how, corporations under Citizens United can donate, unlimited amounts of money to political candidates, but
unions can't donate any.
Can't donate a dime.
Not a dime.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's mind-boggling. Even the people who voluntarily, even under a right-to-work regime, you would think that if I'm voluntarily paying union dues right now. You would think that if I'm voluntarily paying union dues, the union should be able to spend it on whatever they want. They wouldn't have these restrictions. But even under a right-to-work regime, we still have the same restrictions as if we didn't. We still cannot spend union dues on political campaigns, on donating to political candidates, et cetera, et cetera. It is it just boggles my mind.
So I'm going to do what I normally do and smash the Democrats for a minute. And Daniel, I noticed your article was written fairly slanted towards the conservative viewpoint against right to work, and rightfully so. The conservatives have been the main instigators of right to work. But what bothers me, and maybe with you being a history student and being in the political spectrum probably a little bit more than I am, is I think a lot of the labor movement has moved from the left towards the center because of the Democrats' unwillingness to team up with labor any longer. And a perfect example of that is the governor of Virginia, who labor overwhelmingly helped put in office. Within weeks of him getting in there, refused to even address right to work in his state, and I'm baffled. I'm baffled by why I assume I'm assuming it's because there's so much corporate money in politics now, and the Democrats want their share. But what have we got to do to get the party of the worker, what we used to consider the party of the worker, back in our corner?
It's funny that you asked that. I wrote an article before this article, much earlier last year in the winter. The Democratic Party must be a workers' party, and I look back on that article now, and I question my logic, because I'm at this point uncertain that the Democratic Party can be a workers' party. I think that, in the introduction to your show, you say it best, that the future of labor will not be decided in Congress. The future of labor will be decided in the union halls. It will be decided on the shop floor. And so when we look at the Democratic Party, we can't think of them as an ally anymore. We have to think of them as less of an adversary than the Republican Party. Yeah. And we can fight them on things, and we can expect them to be a little more sympathetic to the agenda of labor. But at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is loyal to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not loyal to the people of the United States. And we look at the history of the Democratic Party, and we see that it was, Bill Clinton signing the neoliberal trade deals. We talk about NAFTA. We talk about permanent normal trade relations with China. These are the trade deals that took millions of jobs. And, George Bush signed them too. And Donald Trump just renewed NAFTA. He called it the USMCA, even though it's the exact same thing, just with Daniel, his signature on it instead.
Hold that thought, and we're going to get to you right on the other side.
Great.
Charge for the land. A population burned up, bled dry. The marginalized multiply and unite to fight. You vacant the world, now they're tearing you apart. The soil you held sacred, now blackened with.
Folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host David Story. On the line, we have Daniel Harris. He is the opinions editor for UChicago Gate, which is the University of Chicago's undergraduate political review. We are talking about his article, Right to Work Must Die. And when we left off, David asked him what needed to happen to make the Democrats an ally to working people again. Because, like Daniel was talking about, we can list a litany of anti-worker projects that Democrats have engaged in over the past several decades. Since, I don't know that, FDR was really the last time that workers had a real friend in a Democratic president, like somebody that they could really count on to be there for them the majority of the time. And so... Daniel, you were, we got cut off by the break, so I'll just let you finish your thought there about what you were talking about before we left off.
Yeah, it's just like you were saying, that the Democrats have been participants in the destruction of organized labor. They have signed the trade deals just going along with the Republicans that have shipped off good union jobs by giving corporations too much leeway. We're not holding the countries that we trade with to a high enough standard to make it a competitive trade deal. They have been very slow to enforce labor legislation and to pass labor legislation. This was a problem with the Obama administration. It's been a problem with recently the PRO Act, protecting the right to organize in Congress. It took way too long for that to pass the House because House leadership did not see it as a priority. That was Democrats who were holding it up. And like you said, Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, who is really a coward, has refused to stand up for working people, even though he owes his political career to them. And even if we look back to FDR, who was certainly a transformational president, he didn't get there on his own. It took pressure and it took bullying from organized labor and workers' movements. And what it really took was the threat of a third party, because the Democratic Party at that time was being outflanked to the left by socialist and other labor parties in the United States. And so what FDR did is he co-opted their agenda. He implemented the New Deal, and that was enough to weaken those parties by showing that the Democratic Party was supposedly a sufficient alternative. And that small amount of co-optation of this socialist workers' agenda made him one of the most wildly popular presidents in American history. And so it really amazes me that the Democrats will refuse to do what's right because they think that it's not politically viable when...
Did we lose him?
We lost him.
Oh, no.
David, of the popular, but the Democrats are too to come to the table, which is why...
Yeah, I think we're going...
Can you hear me?
We're going in and out. I think we've got a problem with some internet issues.
Okay, that may be on my end. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
We can hear you. Sorry about that.
All right. No, absolutely. And I was just going to finish my point, say that if we want the Democrats to be allies to organized labor, it takes bullying and it takes pressure. And we're not going to be able to sit back and watch them get there on their own, because they will not.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's one thing that I always point out, because I being the president of my union, in Alabama, of course, have an extremely strong right-wing group of members. And, they pay dues. They recognize that we're doing good work, but they vote Republican consistently. And that's something that I constantly point out, is as much as I would like to see them vote more labor-friendly, so long as we hold the politicians that we elect accountable for their actions. And I think that's probably where the drop-off has been for years, is the fact that nobody, I talk to people all the time at work and say, when's the last time you've called your congressman? Mm-hmm. When's the last time you've even emailed them? We're not on teams. These folks are our public servants. We should hold them accountable for every action that they take, and on both sides.
Yeah, there's genuinely a lot of hero worship on either side. If you get too into Democratic circles, I mean, even FDR, who's probably my favorite president, there are Democrats who would, upon their reading of it, you would think that it was FDR being a benevolent, class traitor, that that he just did this all on his own, and you wouldn't think that there were people literally being murdered in the streets, fighting for their rights and like demanding that the government do something, and him being pushed to where that was his only option, was to implement the New Deal and to do things for working people. It wasn't like his benevolence; it was that he was forced to do that. And when I'm in Democratic circles, and they'll say something about Obama, and I'm like lukewarm at best about it, and they're like surprised at me, and I'm like, what? He was not that great. He was like a moderate Republican, basically. So,
and what you said earlier really it kind of spurs the thought of, is it your opinion that, with you saying that the possibility of a third party under FDR is what pushed him farther to the left, and now we see a big resurgence in DSA, and DSA working really hand in hand? I mean, I can't count the amount of people that's reached out to labor, as far as me, from the DSA. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has a possibility of pushing the Democrats back farther into the pocket of labor?
That's a good question. I think that they've done good work, and I think that because they call themselves the Democratic Socialists, they're really more like social democrats, what we see in Europe, and the policies they've pushed, the candidates they get elected, they're doing good work, and I appreciate their organizing model, because they start at the local level. And they obviously they throw their hat into the ring with national races, but they understand that local organizing is more effective. They're picking off seats in city councils, in state senates, and that's important work. I think that the prospect of a successful third party is dim in my opinion. I think that the Democratic Party is just too good at its job of warding off any threats to the left. And I think that we can have two trains running at the same time. We can, on the one hand, pressure the Democratic Party, pull them to the left, have organizations like DSA, which are doing electoral work. But then I think on the other hand, we need mass movements. We need really a popular front of workers who are committed to this sort of mass change in society. And that has to come from the ground up, because, well, elected officials can do good work. And a lot of these, a lot of the DSA candidates like AOC, Ilhan Omar, they're great candidates, and same in the state senates. What we really need, and they're great elected officials, they've done good work in office. What we really need is for working people to come together and take that power back for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I love a lot of the work that the DSA is doing. And in fact, the DSA here in North Alabama just bought an ad encouraging people to join, and that's going to be playing beginning next week. We weren't able to get it produced in time to have it run this Saturday, but it'll start playing next week. And they're doing a lot of good stuff here, and they're doing a lot of good stuff down in Birmingham. They're doing brake light clinics, and they've got a free store that they operate down there. So they're doing a lot of. and like you said, it's really interesting the way that they're locally driven. They're not, they have national initiatives, obviously, but the majority of the things that each chapter does is determined locally, and I think that's a really good way to do it.
Yep.
Yeah. So Daniel, we really appreciate you coming on.
Yes.
How much time do we have left in this segment, David?
Oh, we've got about 3.5
minutes. Daniel, have you got any kind of closing thoughts about what we've been talking about, right to work legislation, the Democratic Party, or anything else about kind of the conservative agenda to like destroy worker power in the country before we let you go?
Yeah, what we've seen over the past few decades, and I say that as if I have been alive, and I have not been alive this whole time, but I can look back and I can look at what's been happening. The Republican Party has succeeded in their attempt to convince working people that it's not their wage and their health care that they should be voting for. It's their opinions on gay people and immigrants and all of these issues that have nothing to do with their life, and that they convince working people that some working people, not all, because I think that working people agree broadly on these issues, but they convince some working people that they should hate other people more than they love themselves, and that they should not vote for better wages, that they should not vote for health care and vote for worker power. And I think that the Democratic Party has fallen into this trap, and the Democratic Party, instead of reminding us what we're fighting for, which is liberating people from their conditions, their material conditions, the Democratic Party has gotten too caught up in these issues that divide people, and they have not actually taken the steps to fight for justice on a lot of these wedge issues. They just performatively say, oh, well, we care more about immigrants, we care more about Black lives, when in reality they don't, and they don't take the necessary steps. And so they allow those issues to be dividing issues rather than taking the necessary steps to solve those problems and then bringing people together around an agenda that all working people can get behind. And I think that unions are the engine of solidarity. And so if we're looking at the possibility of a new politics in this country, it's going to start and end with organized labor. And I really appreciate what you guys do. You're great unionists and organizers, and I appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed it. Daniel, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at @BeatANazi, and that's where you'll find me putting up my articles, and you can follow my opinions there. I'll tweet all of my angry thoughts, and otherwise I'll link all my articles at UChicago Gate. That's the undergraduate political review, and you can see the work of myself and plenty of other brilliant students at the University of Chicago. We're having a lot of important conversations, and we'd love to have you plug in.
All right, Daniel, we really appreciate your time. This is I really enjoyed
much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so
much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, folks, that was Daniel Harris. He is the opinions editor at the UChicago Gate, which is the University of Chicago's political review. You can find him on Twitter at @BeatANazi. That is @BeatANazi on Twitter. So make sure you go follow him. And thanks again for coming on, Daniel. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments throughout the week. And we also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So you can see if we're on your listening platform of choice. You can go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. And if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, then consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.